Pnina Arad, and I assist women and couples who encounter difficulties in their neurodiverse relationships. I'm also the author of the book When Your Man is on the Spectrum. I have a private practice in Israel and I work online with people all over the world. I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me to participate in this conference, and I would like to thank you all for listening to my presentation. Let me start by telling you the story of Cassandra, which is taken from Greek mythology. Cassandra was a young and beautiful prophetess who received the gift of prophecy from the god Apollo. After she refused his courtship, she was cursed by him that no one would believe her prophecies even though they were true. So Cassandra was left with the knowledge of future events, but without the ability to change them or to convince others of their validity. The Cassandra metaphor is often applied to describe a phenomenon in which people suffering from physical or emotional pain encounter disbelief when they attempt to share the cause of their suffering with others. Over time, the Cassandra metaphor was widely embraced by women in neurodiverse relationships, especially those with partners who have not been formally diagnosed. This happened because many of these women encounter reactions of disbelief and lack of understanding when they try to share their difficulties with family members or friends. They would often hear that all men are alike or all men are a little bit autistic, responses which leave them very confused, wondering whether they are the ones exaggerating or maybe expecting too much of marital relationships. In most cases, even when these women turn to professionals for help, they are left with the feeling that they are not understood and are not given answers to their distress. This is not surprising, as individuals with high-functioning autism look just like other people. They can be charming, intelligent, and very creative people. They often have successful careers, and they are very different from the stereotypical image of a person with autism. People outside the relationship do not usually experience them within emotional context and do not experience the strict and ritualistic lifestyle which they lead at home. So, on the one hand, women's intuition tells them that something unusual is going on in their relationship, that their difficulties are much more extreme than those of other couples. But on the other hand, no one else witnesses what they see, and no one understands what they are talking about, hence they are left with no validation of their intuitive feelings. This dissonance is the story of Cassandra. It creates a lot of frustration, confusion, and self-doubt. In my presentation, I will give some background and talk about the existing body of knowledge regarding women in neurodiverse relationships. I will describe the quantitative study I conducted as part of my doctoral dissertation, supervised by Professor Tzipora Shechtman and Professor Tony Atwood, who reviewed and edited the manuscript. I will share the findings of my research and discuss the conclusions and implications of my study's results. I have no conflict of interests to report. Bostock, Link, Cumming, and Bundy conducted a systematic literature review to study the life satisfaction of neurotypical women in neurodiverse relationships. They decided to include formal as well as informal diagnosis of autism. The relevant articles had undergone academic peer review, and ultimately, out of 1,736 relevant articles derived from the initial search, they were left with only 10 articles which met the inclusion criteria determined in advance. 6 of these studies were case studies. None of the studies included intervention, and all of them received a low overall grade based on the levels of proof recommended by the Australian National Research Council. In short, none of these studies provided reliable proof about the life satisfaction of neurotypical women in neurodiverse relationships. Since Asperger's was first introduced into the DSM in the 90s, there has been a steady rise in the rate of children diagnosed with autism. This can be mainly attributed to updates made in the diagnostic criteria and to a rise in public awareness concerning the disorder. According to a formal report based on data from CDC, the most recent estimated rate of ASD diagnosis is about 1 in every 44 8-year-old children. ASD is estimated to be about 4 times more common among boys than among girls. However, late diagnosis is rendered to half of the individuals with autism without intellectual disability, and many of them reach maturity without being diagnosed at all. It is estimated that 50 to 60% of the people with high-functioning autism have not been diagnosed. The lost generation is a term coined by Lion Baron Cohen, and it is used in reference to adults who were not diagnosed in the youth due to lack of criteria. While the global awareness of autism continues to show signs of growth, only few empirical studies investigated how ASD influenced romantic relationships. These studies focused on marital satisfaction and exhibited contradicting results. The existing body of knowledge is mainly based on the personal accounts of women in neurodiverse relationships, who describe a pattern of ongoing emotional deprivation. The recurring complaints of these women focus on their feelings of loneliness, as well as the absence of emotional support and empathic understanding from their partner with ASD. Many women describe a relationship categorized by physical and emotional abuse, extreme challenges in communication, and high levels of conflict. They complain about significant negative effects of the relationship on their physical and mental health, and describe symptoms that resemble those of trauma and post-trauma. The current literature also suggests that the lack of competence of professionals in recognizing or diagnosing ASD in adults not only leaves these women without an effective response to their complaints, but the inability to validate women's experiences worsens their condition. Still, in view of the lack of proof-based literature and lack of high-quality studies on this topic, it is not surprising that the scientific community does not take seriously what may seem to be a collection of complaints by bitter women who blame their autistic partners for their hardships, usually without even having a formal diagnosis of autism. It was very important for me to change the existing situation in my research. Aiming to raise clinical and public awareness of this important topic, I conducted a quantitative study based on empirical data. I aimed to find out what effects relating with someone with autism may have on the physical and mental well-being of neurotypical women. The research population included 648 women in 3 groups, 2 study groups and 1 control group. The first study group comprised 228 women whose partners were formally diagnosed with ASD. The second study group comprised 203 women who suspected their partner to be on the autism spectrum, and the control group included 217 women with neurotypical partners who were neither diagnosed nor was there any suspicion of autism about them. The 3 main diagnoses reported among women whose partners have been formally diagnosed were Asperger's, high-functioning autism, and ASD. I chose to categorize them all as ASD diagnoses to align with the current DSM. All women participating in the research were above the age of 18 and were currently or in the past in a relationship with a man for a period of at least 1 year. The average age of the participants was 42. 86% of the participants were in long-term relationship with an average length of 13 years. 60% had children, and 70% were employed with an average of 15 years of education. Most respondents were from the United States. Others were from European and English-speaking countries. The study was correlational using convenience sampling. Participation in the study was anonymous and voluntary. An internet site was constructed which provided detailed information about the study in English, with links to a research consent form and questionnaires. Information regarding the study was publicized through websites, forums for people with autism and their families, and support groups for women in neurodiverse relationships. The information was also distributed through professionals in the field of autism and counselors treating neurodiverse couples. Participants in the control group were recruited through Amazon's mTalk, which has become a popular source of collecting data for studies in psychology. It is supported by evidence that data collected through this service is not less reliable than data collected by means of other traditional methods. Data collection was performed through 6 online self-report questionnaires. All rating scales were found to be highly reliable and valid in previous studies and were used in the language of origin, which was English. The first instrument was the ABI, Abusive Behavior Inventory. This inventory contains 30 items and is designed to measure the physical and psychological abuse of women by their male partners. The second instrument was Perceived Health Questionnaire. It contains 4 questions designed to evaluate the physical health of the respondent as she perceives it. The third instrument was PHQ-15, which is a 15-item patient health questionnaire. I chose to use this instrument as it includes a large variety of somatic symptoms for which medical explanation is often missing and which are also characteristic of recurrent trauma. The first 13 items refer to physical symptoms such as stomach pain, back pain, and headaches. The last 2 items are difficulty sleeping and low energy level, which are signs of depression. The fourth questionnaire was Back Depression Inventory, which consists of 21 multiple choice questions. This is the most widely used instrument to screen for depression and to measure the severity of depression. The fifth questionnaire was Subjective Well-being Short Scale. This scale contains 4 questions which describe how people experience the quality of their lives, and it includes 3 components of well-being: life satisfaction, positive affect, and negative affect. The 6th instrument was Informative Questionnaire for Women. This is a basic demographic questionnaire that includes informative questions about the participants, questions that refer to their relationship status, and questions which relate to the formal diagnosis or lack of formal diagnosis of the partner reported as being on the autism spectrum. Data analysis was conducted with SPSS version 24. The information provided by the literature indicates that the traits characterizing autism might lead to ongoing physical and emotional abuse within intimate relationships. Very often, this is unintentional abuse, deriving from the expression of autistic traits without the partner's deliberate intention and without him understanding the severity of his behavior. The first hypothesis of my research was that women with diagnosed partners and women who suspect their partner to be on the autism spectrum will report being subjected to physical and emotional abuse at a higher rate than women in neurotypical relationships. As you can see, the formal diagnosis group is colored in green, the suspicion group is colored in purple, and the control group is colored in orange. And the results. findings showed significantly higher rates of physical and psychological abuse reported by women in the two study groups in comparison to women in the control group. For all three groups, the report about psychological abuse was at a significantly higher rate than the report about physical abuse. Nevertheless, findings revealed a significant gap that differentiated between the two study groups and the control group, showing a higher rate of psychological abuse than of physical abuse for women whose partners have been formally diagnosed with ASD and for women who suspected their partner to be on the autism spectrum in comparison to women in neurotypical relationships. Unfortunately, while physical abuse is getting wide-scale public exposure and serious consideration by the law, psychological abuse is not being treated with the same level of seriousness, although it is related to severe physical and mental consequences. While the biomedical model of health, which is dominant in the Western world, looks at illness as being caused by purely biological factors, many studies have been conducted over the recent decades showing a clear connection between body and mind and proving how emotional situations affect the immune system. The second hypothesis of my research was that women with diagnosed partners and women who suspect their partner to be on the autism spectrum will report lower physical and mental health than women in neurotypical relationships. Significant differences were found among the groups for the three measures of health used in the study. Women in the study groups reported similar and significantly lower perceived health, more somatic symptoms, and higher somatic symptom severity than women in the control group. It is nowadays clear that genetic and biological factors cannot in themselves explain the development of depressive disorders, and that environmental factors like stress play a major role in the development of depression. Many research studies indicate that marital distress accelerates the appearance of depressive symptoms and affects women more severely than men. It was also found that low levels of intimacy with a romantic partner was the most significant variable in the development of depression in women. The third hypothesis of my research was that women with diagnosed partners and women who suspect their partner to be on the autism spectrum will report experiencing symptoms of depression more noticeably than women in neurotypical relationships. Significant differences were found among the groups for the two measures of depression used in the study. Women in the study groups reported significantly higher levels of depression and higher depressive symptom severity than women in the control group. The fourth hypothesis of my research was that the personal sense of well-being of women with diagnosed partners and women who suspect their partner to be on the autism spectrum will be reported as worse than the personal sense of well-being reported by women in neurotypical relationships. Significant differences were found among the groups for the personal sense of well-being. Women in the two study groups reported significantly lower subjective well-being than women in the control group. In summary, all research hypotheses were fully and significantly confirmed. I would now like to move on and focus on another important finding that emerged from the research: the lack of difference between women whose partners were formally diagnosed with ASD and women who suspected their partner to be on the autism spectrum. A significant and traumatic component repeated in each of the stories of women in neurodiverse relationships includes the long period of time in which they encountered reactions of disbelief, lack of understanding, and lack of acceptance by their surroundings prior to the formal diagnosis of their partner with ASD. It is therefore important to acknowledge that the existence or not of a formal diagnosis is not relevant for the lost generation of adults who were not diagnosed during their childhood due to lack of criteria. In fact, women who suspect diagnosis should be viewed as needy of support, direction, and guidance to the same extent as those women with diagnosed partners. Due to lack of previously conducted empirical studies on this topic, there were limited possibilities to compare between the findings of this study and previous studies. The main limitations of the study were reliance on self-report instruments, the use of convenience sampling, and the impossibility of pointing towards causation. It is possible that women who seek support were particularly interested in participating in a study about this topic, and if such a selection bias exists, then women who are content in their neurodiverse relationships might be underrepresented in this sample. Obviously, more research needs to be done to continue the direction of this study and to address its limitations. However, the dramatic results of this study are distressing and cannot be ignored. The present study, with its preliminary findings, indicates a severe physical and mental condition of women in relationships with men on the autism spectrum. To the best of my knowledge, it is the first empirical study focusing on this topic, and I very much hope that it will encourage the scientific community to conduct further research into this field in the nearest future. I also hope that it will stimulate an international multidisciplinary effort to change the recognition and treatment of women in neurodiverse relationships. The current research has significant clinical and practical implications concerning the need to enrich the knowledge and expertise of healthcare professionals. As of right now, most professionals aren't trained or lack the experience to recognize or diagnose ASD in adults. Hence, they fail to provide efficient help for neurodiverse couples and women in such relationships. Given the fact that ASD diagnosis is on a constant rise and that most of the high-functioning adult population is still undiagnosed, it is to be expected that the number of women and couples who will need informative guidance and therapeutic intervention will grow as well in the years to come. It is therefore necessary to develop educational programs for practitioners that will help them identify the Cassandras and their partners on the high-functioning end of the autism spectrum, those who have never been nor will ever be officially diagnosed. It is essential that professionals increase their alertness and recognize the characteristic complaints of neurodiverse couples who seek their help, and thus prevent undue suffering, frustration, and confusion. Furthermore, it is of the utmost importance to develop effective clinical interventions for this population of women and to offer validation, support, and treatment that can relieve and ease their distress. My research also points at an urgent need to develop preventative, instructional, and therapeutic measures to prepare young neurodiverse couples for family life and to help them preserve and maintain their relationships. Finally, addressing the physical and mental well-being of women in neurodiverse relationships is crucial for helping these couples experience a happier and a more mutually fulfilling relationship. If you would like to acquire more knowledge about the topic and learn about the qualitative part of my research, you are invited to read my book, When Your Man is on the Spectrum, which can be found on Amazon. You are also welcome to contact me at my email address. I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have. Thank you very much for listening to my presentation.